Someone at work asks, "Did you see the news last night?" And you just didn't. Not because you forgot, not because you were too busy, but because at some point, maybe years ago, maybe last month, you just stopped. Stopped checking headlines first thing in the morning. Stopped scrolling through breaking news alerts. Stopped watching the evening broadcast like it's some civic duty you inherited. And when people find out, they look at you like you've opted out of civilization itself. How do you stay informed? Aren't you worried about missing something important? Don't you care what's happening in the world? Here's what they don't understand. You didn't stop caring. You stopped drowning. Welcome to the psychology of people who don't watch the news. And no, you're not ignorant. You're protecting something most people don't even realize they're losing. Let's talk about what actually happened. You didn't wake up one day and decide to be that person who doesn't follow current events. You just started noticing a pattern. Every time you watched the news, you felt worse. Not informed. Worse. Anxious. Helpless. Like the world was collapsing and you were supposed to do something about it, but had no idea what. That's not an accident. That's by design. Media scholars have a term for this. The negativity bias amplification loop. Here's how it works. Your brain is already wired with a negativity bias, an evolutionary quirk that made your ancestors pay more attention to threats than opportunities. Makes sense. The ancestor who ignored the rustling bush got eaten by a tiger. The one who panicked at every sound survived to pass on those anxious genes. Fast forward to today. Your brain still works the same way, still treats bad news like it's a predator you need to track. But now, the bad news isn't one tiger. It's every tragedy, crisis, conflict, and catastrophe happening across the entire planet. Delivered to you 24/7, in HD, with push notifications. Sociologist George Gerbner studied this in the 1970s and found something wild. People who watch a lot of news develop what he called mean world syndrome. They overestimate violence, overestimate danger, start believing the world is far more hostile and terrifying than it actually is. Not because the world got worse, because their information diet is 90% disaster. And here's the kicker. You can't unlearn what you absorb. Every plane crash, every shooting, every political scandal, every economic meltdown, your brain files it away as evidence that the world is unsafe, that people are terrible, that everything is falling apart, even if statistically, objectively, you're living in one of the safest, healthiest, most prosperous moments in human history. Your brain doesn't care about statistics. It cares about stories. And the news is selling you the same story every single night. Danger, chaos, fear. Now here's where it gets deeper. You didn't just stop watching because it made you anxious. You stopped because you realized something most people haven't figured out yet. Watching the news doesn't actually help anyone. It just makes you feel like you're doing something. Philosopher Alain de Botton calls this the news delusion, the belief that consuming information about problems is the same as solving them. It's not. You can watch 50 hours of coverage about a famine and it won't feed a single person. You can read every article about climate change and your carbon footprint stays exactly the same. You can follow every political scandal in real time and have zero impact on the outcome. But you'll feel like you're engaged, informed, participating, when really, you're just a spectator, watching other people's emergencies like it's a sport. And that spectatorship comes with a cost. Psychologists call it learned helplessness. You're exposed to so many massive, unsolvable problems that you start to believe nothing you do matters. Why donate to that local charity when there's a refugee crisis overseas? Why help your neighbor when there's a war halfway around the world? Your brain starts treating everything like it's too big to handle, so you handle nothing. You just watch and scroll and feel vaguely bad about existing. Here's what nobody tells you. The moment you stopped watching the news, you didn't become less informed. You became selectively informed. There's a massive difference. Being informed in the traditional sense means knowing about every crisis, every conflict, every disaster happening everywhere all the time. Being selectively informed means you choose what actually matters to your life and your capacity to act. Local elections? Yeah, you can vote in those. Community issues? Yeah, you can show up to those meetings. A crisis happening 8,000 miles away that you have zero ability to influence? That's not information. That's emotional labor disguised as awareness. And you stop doing it. Let's zoom out for a second. Anthropologists point out that for 99% of human history, your information radius was about 150 people. Dunbar's number. The max number of stable social relationships a human brain can maintain. You knew what was happening in your village, your tribe, your immediate community. That was it. And that made sense, because those were the people you could actually help, the problems you could actually solve. Now, you're expected to carry the emotional weight of 8 billion people's problems, every famine, every war, every injustice. Like you're personally responsible for all of it. You're not. And your brain wasn't built for that. Trying to care about everything everywhere all at once doesn't make you a good person. It makes you exhausted. So you stopped. Not because you're cold, but because you finally understood the difference between compassion and consumption. Compassion is action. It's local. It's specific. It's showing up for the people in front of you. Consumption is passive. It's global. It's abstract. It's watching someone else's suffering and calling it empathy. You chose compassion, and that required turning off the feed. Here's the thing people don't get. When you tell them you don't watch the news, they hear, "I don't care." What you're actually saying is, "I care too much to let my attention be weaponized," because that's what the news cycle does. It weaponizes your attention. Every notification, every alert, every breaking banner. It's not informing you. It's farming you, harvesting your clicks, your outrage, your anxiety. Media critic Neil Postman warned about this decades ago. He said we'd stop being informed citizens and start becoming entertained consumers. And he was right. The news isn't news anymore. It's a reality show where the stakes are real, but your ability to change anything is zero. You're not the audience they're serving. You're the product they're selling to advertisers. And you figured that out. So you left. Now let's talk about what happens when you actually stop. At first, you feel guilty, like you're supposed to know what's happening, like you're failing some unspoken test of adulthood. But then something shifts. You start noticing you have more mental space, more energy, more bandwidth for the people and problems right in front of you. You're not carrying the weight of every global crisis in your back pocket. You're not doom-scrolling at 11 p.m., spiraling into existential dread about things you can't control. You're just present, and people in your life start noticing. Not because you're uninformed, but because you're calm. You're not the person at dinner ranting about the latest political scandal. You're not the one sending panicked texts about whatever catastrophe just hit the headlines. You're the one who's actually there, listening, helping, showing up. And that's not apathy. That's wisdom. Stoic philosopher Epictetus had a framework for this 2,000 years ago. He said, "Focus on what's in your control. Let go of what's not." The news is almost entirely things you can't control, so you let it go. Not because you don't care, but because caring without the ability to act is just suffering. And you decided to stop suffering for no reason. Here's what I need you to hear. You're not missing out. You're opting out of a system that was never designed to serve you. A system that profits from your anxiety, that turns your attention into ad revenue, that keeps you hooked on outrage and despair. You saw through it, and you walked away. That doesn't make you ignorant. It makes you intentional. It doesn't make you disconnected. It makes you selective about what and who you connect with. You stopped confusing being informed with being overwhelmed. You stopped treating global awareness like a moral obligation. You stopped letting strangers on TV tell you how to feel. And instead, you started living in the world you can actually touch, the people you can actually help, the problems you can actually solve. That's not ignorance. That's clarity. So the next time someone asks, "Did you see the news?" you can smile and say no. Not because you don't care about the world, but because you care about your mind, your peace, your capacity to actually show up for the people who need you. You didn't stop watching the news because you're uninformed. You stopped because you finally understood. The noise was never the signal, and you don't owe anyone access to your attention. That's not opting out. That's protecting what matters, and that's one of the smartest things you've ever done.